The morning I signed the papers, I sat in my car in the parking lot of my attorney's office for a long time. Just sat there. The engine was off. The check was in a manila envelope on the passenger seat, and I kept looking at it like it might disappear if I moved too fast. 41 years. That's how long I'd run that business. Started it in a single rented bay on the south side of Columbus, Ohio. Fixing small engines, lawnmowers, generators, the occasional outboard motor. My hands were rough from it by the time I was 30. By the time I was 63, I had 4 locations, 22 employees, and a reputation that meant something in that part of the state. When the buyer's representative slid that final offer across the conference table, I didn't flinch. I said I needed a night to think about it. That was a lie. I had already decided. My knees hurt every morning. My back hurt by noon. And the truth was, I was tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix anymore. The sale closed on a Thursday in late October. $4.2 million after taxes and fees and the cut my attorney took for 12 years of keeping me out of trouble. I was 64 years old, alone in a parking lot, and richer than I had ever imagined I would be. My son hadn't spoken to me in 12 years. I want to be careful about how I tell that part, because it's easy to make myself sound like the victim and leave out the pieces that don't flatter me. The truth is, the falling out between my son and me was not a single explosion. It was a long, slow erosion. His mother and I divorced when he was 19, and I handled that badly. I worked too much during the years when he needed a father who showed up, and then when the marriage ended, I think he found it easier to direct his grief at me than to carry it without a target. I understood that, even if it hurt. What I didn't understand, and still don't entirely, is how 12 years becomes the answer. How a man decides that a decade of silence is the appropriate response to a father who was imperfect but never cruel. I tried, in the early years of the estrangement, I wrote letters, actual letters on paper, because that was the kind of man I was raised to be. I drove to his apartment once, in the second year, and stood outside the door for 10 minutes before I knocked. He opened it, looked at me, and said he wasn't ready. Then he closed the door. I drove 3 hours home and didn't try again for a while after that. Eventually, I stopped trying as hard. I'm not proud of that. But there is only so many times you can reach out to someone before the reaching starts to feel like begging, and I was raised not to beg. I heard things about his life through a mutual cousin, that he had married a woman named Faye, that they had bought a house in a suburb of Cincinnati. The Faye's family was large and close-knit in a way that I suspected had become a replacement for whatever he felt he'd lost. I was glad he had that, and genuinely was. I just wasn't part of it. After the sale, I bought a small place in the lake community about 40 minutes outside of Columbus. Nothing grand. 3 bedrooms, a covered porch that faced the water, a dock that needed some work. I fixed the dock myself over the first 2 weeks, which was exactly the kind of project I needed. Physical, quiet, something I could complete. I had a neighbor to my left named Wendell who was 81 and grew tomatoes and wanted to talk about the weather every morning. And that suited me fine. I had a dog named Biscuit, who I had adopted 3 years earlier when it became clear that I was going to be spending my evenings alone indefinitely. I had my coffee in the morning and my book at night, and a body that was finally starting to rest. I did not announce the sale publicly. I told a handful of people, my attorney, my accountant, a few employees I had known for 20 years and wanted to look out for. I did not post anything online. I did not tell the mutual cousin. I want you to understand that, because the question of how my son found out matters. It matters to the story, and it matters to me, because for a while, I tortured myself wondering if I had done something careless, said something to the wrong person. What I eventually pieced together was this. One of my former employees, a man I had trusted and treated generously, mentioned the sale to someone at a family gathering. That someone knew someone who knew Faye's family. And Faye's family, as I would come to learn, talked about everything. My son called on a Sunday evening in early December, about 6 weeks after the closing. I was on the porch with Biscuit and a glass of iced tea, watching the last light come off the water. My phone rang, and I looked at the screen, and I saw his name, and I sat very still for 2 full rings before I answered. "Dad," he said. Just that one word. I hadn't heard his voice say that word in 12 years. I won't pretend it didn't do something to me. "Hey, son," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. The conversation that followed was strange in the way that conversations are strange when two people are trying to be normal about something that is not normal at all. He asked how I was doing. I said fine. I asked the same. He said fine. He mentioned the lake house. He had clearly done some research and said it sounded nice. I said it was. There was a long pause, and then he said he had heard about the business, and he wanted me to know he thought it was a good decision, that I had worked hard enough for long enough. I thanked him. I meant it. Then he said he was wondering if they might come visit. Him and Faye. Just to catch up, to see the place, and he paused here, to reconnect. His word. I said yes. Of course I said yes. He was my son. What I did not know, when I said yes, was what they meant in his mind. They arrived on a Friday afternoon, and I was standing on the porch when the car turned into my driveway. It was a large SUV. It parked, and my son got out from the driver's side, and Faye got out from the passenger side, and then the back doors opened, and 4 more people got out. Faye's mother. Faye's father. Faye's brother, a thick-necked man in his mid-30s named Donovan, who I had never met, and Donovan's girlfriend, whose name I would learn was Opal. 6 people, with luggage. I stood on that porch and I kept my face very neutral. Years of running a business teaches you to do that, to keep your face neutral while your mind is working hard behind it. My son walked up and hugged me. It was an awkward hug, the kind between people who used to know how to hug each other and have forgotten. I hugged him back. He looked older. So did I, probably. Faye hugged me too, which surprised me, because I had never met Faye in person before. She was pleasant-looking, warm in her manner, and something about her warmth made me uneasy in a way I couldn't immediately explain. Then I was introduced to everyone else, and I shook hands on the porch of my own home, and I said I was glad they'd made the trip, because what else do you say? I had prepared to 2 guest rooms. I had not prepared for 6 people. I said this plainly, without anger. I said I had thought it was just the 2 of them coming, that I didn't have the space for everyone. Faye's mother, a compact woman who moved like she was used to being in charge of rooms, waved her hand and said it was no trouble. They were flexible. Donovan and Opal could take the couch. She and her husband would take one room, and my son and Faye could take the other. She said this in my house, about my rooms. I let it go. I shouldn't have. But he was my son, and I hadn't seen him in 12 years, and I told myself that I could tolerate a full house for one weekend if it meant something real was being rebuilt. That evening, I grilled enough chicken for 8 people, and we ate on the porch. And it was almost normal. My son and I talked about the business, about the lake, about things that happened years ago that we could both laugh at from a safe distance. I watched him when he didn't know I was watching, trying to find the 19-year-old I remembered inside the 41-year-old sitting across from me. He was in there somewhere. I could see it when he smiled. Faye's father, a quiet man who seemed as uncomfortable as I was, sat next to me and we talked about fishing for a while, and I thought, well, maybe this is fine. It was not fine. The next morning, I came downstairs at 6 to make coffee, which is what I always do, and found Donovan already in my kitchen, frying eggs, having helped himself to everything in my refrigerator. He greeted me like we were old friends and told me I needed more butter. I got my coffee and went out to the porch. An hour later, Faye's mother joined me. She sat down without asking, which was fine, and then she said, in a tone that was almost cheerful, that she hoped I was enjoying the lake house, but that 3 bedrooms really wasn't practical for a property this size, that if I was going to have family here, I would need more space. I looked at her. I wasn't planning on having family here regularly, I said. This is my home. I live alone. She smiled in a way that suggested she hadn't fully heard me. Of course, she said. But family is family. That afternoon, my son asked if we could talk privately. We walked down to the dock, just the 2 of us, and I thought, here it is. Here's the real conversation. The one we've owed each other for 12 years. He started with the right things. He said he was sorry for the time that had passed. He said he knew he had handled things poorly. He said he had thought about it a lot over the years. I listened carefully because I had waited a long time for those words, and I wanted to receive them properly, not let old bitterness get between me and what he was actually offering. Then he said there was something he wanted to talk to me about. He said that he and Faye were in a difficult position financially. He said the house they had bought was more than they could manage, that Faye's parents had been helping them but couldn't continue indefinitely, that things were tight. He said he had been thinking about whether there was any way I could help. A loan, he called it, or an investment. He was quick to say investment, like the word made it something other than what it was. I looked out at the water for a moment. How much? I said. He named a figure. It was not a small figure. I didn't say anything right away. I was thinking about the dock under my feet, which I had fixed with my own hands. I was thinking about 41 years. I was thinking about 12 years. I was doing the math on all of it. Is that why you came? I asked. Not to visit me, to ask for money. He said it wasn't only that. He said he had genuinely wanted to see me. I believe that was partially true, but I also believe that the call would not have come when it did, 6 weeks after the sale of my business, if Faye's family hadn't passed along the information that made the call feel worth making. I told him I needed to think about it. He nodded, and we walked back up to the house, and I could feel the difference between the man who had walked out to the dock and the man walking back. That evening, Donovan pulled me aside in the kitchen. He was more direct than my son. He said he understood I had come into some money, and he said he didn't want to be awkward about it. But Faye's parents had put a lot into my son and Faye over the years, and it would mean a great deal if I could help restore some of what they had given. He said it like they were presenting me with an invoice. I told Donovan politely and with great clarity that any financial conversations I had would be with my son, and that I wasn't having them with him. He looked at me like I had said something rude. I had not said anything rude. Faye's mother appeared in the kitchen doorway, as if she'd been stationed there. She said she hoped I didn't mind, but she'd taken the liberty of looking at the third bedroom, the one I used as a study, and thought it would make a much nicer guest room if I moved the desk out. That was the moment, that specific moment. I had been adding things up all day, all weekend, and that was the moment the sum became clear. I said in a voice that surprised me with its quietness, I think it's time to make some plans for tomorrow morning. I called my attorney that night from the dock, standing in the dark with Biscuit at my feet. I told him what was happening and asked him to draft a simple letter. Nothing aggressive, just a clear statement of what I intended and did not intend to do with my assets. He said he'd have it ready by Monday. Then I called Wendell next door. I asked if he could do me a favor and take Biscuit for the day Sunday. He said sure, and I could hear in his voice that he didn't ask questions, which was one of several things I liked about Wendell. Sunday morning, I was up before anyone else. I made a full breakfast, eggs, toast, the works, and I set it all out on the table. When everyone came downstairs, I let them eat. I sat with my coffee and let them be comfortable, because I had made a decision and I was in no hurry. When the plates were mostly clear, I said I had something to tell them. I said that I had enjoyed having my son visit. I meant it. I said that I hoped it wouldn't be another 12 years before we saw each other again. I meant that too. Then I said that I had spoken to my attorney, and that I had made decisions about my estate and my finances that were now in writing. I said I would not be extending any loans or investments at this time. I said the house would not be accommodating additional guests going forward, and that I would appreciate it if today was treated as a departure day. Faye's mother started to say something. I raised my hand gently, and she stopped. I said I wanted to be fair, and I wanted to be honest. I understood why they had come, and I didn't have hard feelings about it. But I needed everyone to be clear on where things stood, so there was no confusion going forward. Donovan pushed back. He said I was being cold. The family supported each other, that I hadn't been around for years, and the least I could do was, I let him finish. Then I said his name. Once. and said that this conversation did not involve him, and I would appreciate it if he respected that. My son was quiet through all of it. That was the hardest part. Watching him sit there and not defend me, not say anything to Donovan, not redirect his mother-in-law. He just looked at the table. I understood why he was caught between things, but understanding it didn't make it easier to watch. They left by early afternoon. The SUV backed out of my driveway with all the luggage it had arrived with, and I stood on the porch again, same as when they'd pulled in, and watched it go. My son got out of the car before they drove away. He walked back up to the porch, and we stood there together for a minute. He said he was sorry. I said I knew. He said he would call. I said I hoped he would, and I meant it. And I said I would answer, and I meant that too. He got back in the car and they drove away, and I went inside, and the house was quiet in the way I had learned to be grateful for. The following week, I met with my accountant and finalized something I'd been thinking about for months. I established a small foundation, not large, not grand, just a structured legal thing with a name and a purpose. The purpose was vocational training grants for veterans transitioning out of military service. Ohio had a lot of them. Men and women who came home with skills that nobody had helped them translate into civilian work. I had spent 41 years running a business that depended on skilled hands, and I knew what it cost to find someone who actually knew what they were doing. The grants wouldn't be life-changing in size, but they would be real, and they would go to people who had earned help the honest way. I named the foundation after my father, who had worked with his hands his whole life and never asked anyone for anything. My son called 3 weeks later. It was a shorter conversation than the one on the dock, and more honest, which was something. He said Faye's family had put some ideas in his head that weren't his, and he was sorry he had shown up the way he did. I said I appreciated him saying so. He asked if he could visit again sometime, just him, maybe in the spring. I said yes. I said I would make sure the dock was in good shape. He called again in February. We talked for 40 minutes. That might not sound like much, but after 12 years, it felt like a long time. We talked about nothing important, which is sometimes more meaningful than talking about things that are. I don't know what comes next with my son. I hope for something real. But I've stopped planning around hope. I plan around what I can do, what I can control, what I can build with my own hands and stand behind. The rest I leave to time. The lake is very still in the morning at this time of year. Biscuit is getting older, we both are, and he doesn't want to walk as far as he used to, so we go to the end of the dock and sit there for a while instead. The water does what water does. The light comes up slowly. There's no hurry for any of it. That is the life I bought with 41 years of work, and I am not giving any part of it away to people who only came looking once they thought it was worth something.